Welcome to the Scaling Tech Podcast, where we help you manage your growing engineering team. Through expert interviews, we help you navigate the challenges of leading, hiring, growing, and nurturing your tech team to deliver the value your customers demand. Brought to you by agilityfeet.com, experts in staffing engineering teams in Latin America for clients globally.
I think that every aspect of an offsite should be looking to create deeper connections between individuals. And sometimes that happens through fun, and sometimes that happens through sessions. How it doesn't happen is when session after session is just sort of a presentation with any questions, the 10 minutes for any questions at the end. But I think that, you can design business sessions, alignment sessions, et cetera, in ways that are really engaging, in ways that encourage small group discussion, large group discussion, a whole bunch of different modalities and ways to sort of get folks talking. And all of those create deeper connections. You don't just have to be having fun. And I mean, those sessions can be fun. I've done some sessions about communication or alignment or whatever that have been very fun. But yeah, I think that those are sort of the main components to look for in an offsite.
Welcome to the Scaling Tech Podcast, the podcast for leaders of growing software engineering teams. I'm Aaron Syme, here with my co-host, David Alfaro. David, today we're going to talk about engineering team health and offsites. You and I have done a lot of team offsites together with our engineering teams over the last decade. What's your favorite memory from one of those experiences?
Well, first I want to say that when we do offsites, we go with an agenda. I mean, we go with specific goals to achieve. So we have structured activities and unstructured activities. The structured activities, I mean, definitely go fantastic, and we achieve what we want. But I have to admit that what I keep in my memory are the unstructured activities. To be clear, when we go for drinks. So I remember when we went to drink caipirinhas in Sao Paulo, Brazil, and then we went to escape room with our people. That was we were able to escape in the last second the room.
Right.
So that was fantastic, and I was able to see different skills in all of them. Skills. The escape room was a great idea, fantastic idea. And then we had to have some survival skills in the wilderness in Costa Rica. Surviving and really, really fighting for our lives in the mountains in Costa Rica was fantastic. It was a week-long activity, and that was great. It was a great memory of mine.
Yeah. Early in our time working together, there were times when we would get together for an offsite in Costa Rica with our team. And I remember those initial ones you always organized, and I would ask, so what are we going to do? And you would just say, trust me, you're going to have a great time. And usually, and I always survived though. So that was great. But yeah, I've had so many great memories of our various team trips. Sometimes it's just our team. Sometimes it's with clients. I think my favorite memory, though, was when we went to Argentina, and one of our Argentinian colleagues organized a soccer game, a football game. And we had team members from U.S., Costa Rica, Argentina, El Salvador, Nicaragua, other countries probably too. We had a great time. It was in the city in Buenos Aires. We rented this field, had a wonderful time. I think not everyone enjoyed it. Our graphic designer, Danny Phillips, I did a little bit of an aggressive slide tackle on him in that game. And every now and then he reminds me of that. But I still have a lot of fond memories, and I don't think he has any permanent injuries from it. But sorry, anyways, Danny. But in addition, because I'm a big soccer fan, how special it was just to play a soccer game in Argentina. It was even more special for me because I had both of my sons with me on that trip. And so I got to play with my sons in Argentina with real Argentinians who were much better at it than us. But it was such just an amazing, cultural and team bonding experience. And yeah, fond memory. That's a photo that every now and then, shows up in my phone, and really fond memories of that. And but there is a lot into planning an effective team offsite, and that's one of the main topics we discussed today with Allison McMillan. And I really enjoyed this conversation with Alan. What did you find interesting about it, David?
Allison has a dimension that is rare to find in engineering, in a person skilled in VPN of engineering. And we discovered early on the conversation why she had the skill set. She takes care of the personalities of each person. She takes it seriously, and she knows how to handle specific personalities when she is putting together engineering teams, how to combine the specific personalities so we can, on top of the technical skills, and how to take that into account when you do the offsites, how to take into account each person's personality. That dimension is fantastic. I think it was a very fun conversation. I really enjoyed talking with someone that understands, and sometimes you are an introvert. So it was great. So good stuff. A lot of science in this, and revealing comments from someone that has a very strong experience doing engineering.
Yeah, it was a really great conversation. So without further ado, let's get to our interview with Allison McMillan. Allison McMillan is an engineering leadership consultant providing a variety of services, including fractional VP of engineering work, crafting highly effective team offsites, and evaluating engineering team health. Prior to her work leading engineering at Forum and QuotaPath, Allison led GitHub's coding department as director of engineering. While at GitHub, she helped lead the launch of GitHub's Codespaces product, as well as work on other products such as Atom, repositories, and pull requests. Allison is also a former startup founder, an active member of the tech community, and has spoken at conferences around the world, including RubyConf, LeadDev, and JSConf EU. You can learn more about her at AllisonMcMillan.com. Welcome to the Scaling Tech Podcast, Allison.
Hi, happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
Well, it's wonderful to have you here. Let's start with more about your background, and maybe start with telling us a little bit about your time at GitHub, because probably every listener to this program has used GitHub and used things you work on. So always interesting to hear from somebody a little bit behind the scenes.
Yeah. Working at GitHub is great. My background, I actually started my professional life. I have a political science degree. I started my professional life in the nonprofit world, working on college campuses with college students. And then I switched careers into tech when I founded my startup, because I just wanted to know more about the tech side of it, and about why different features or different things that I wanted to do took longer or shorter, et cetera. And so that was sort of my journey and my switch into tech. I was an IC for a number of years at a few different great companies. And then, went into engineering management, engineering leadership at GitHub. Such kind, smart, wonderful people. And it is really, really fun to work on a product and for a company that is basically a household name in the industry. I worked in a variety of places. Like you mentioned, I was on Atom, the open source text editor. I ran. I oversaw a few R&D teams that were sort of developing new products. That was a lot of fun. I ran the department that housed GitHub Desktop and CLI. And then ultimately, I spent a good amount of time running the coding department, which was code spaces, repositories, and pull requests. Each of those areas really different in sort of what they're looking for, what they're going for, how long they had been around, et cetera. So yeah, lots of fun working with amazing people who I am still in touch with.
Can I ask? I didn't know about your political science background. That's quite interesting. Is there no? Let me see how that background have influenced has influenced your work in this other side as a let's say as a uh, yeah as a VP of engineering. I mean, I bet there are good um, crossovers there that you've seen and you've put in practice, I think.
Are you better at
Yeah.
managing office politics as a result?
Yeah.
Well, I think there are two, maybe three main things
Okay.
that I was really able to sort of bring with me. The first is uh, being able to do more with less. I mean, that's
Mm.
something that a lot of people are hearing, especially right now in the industry. But when you start in the nonprofit world, right, like you don't have oodles of resources and tons of sort of a ability to sort of do whatever. um and so, really thinking about what are we spending money on. I found that sometimes in the past I've actually had to push myself to spend more money to like meet the budget. But what are we spending money on? What's the impact of that? Is there a scrappy way? I mean, this was my startup background as well, right? Is there a scrappy way to get to the same result? So I think that's first. The second thing is that I am really good at translating between technical and non-technical stakeholders,
Nice.
which is something
Mm.
that on a leadership team, right, when you're working cross-departmentally with sales and customer success and all of these different departments, engineering can sort of feel like a black box. It can feel like
Mm.
engineering is explaining something, but nobody quite understands what is being explained because
Mm.
of the jargon being used or the way things are explained. And because I come from the non-technical side of the world into the technical side, I'm really good at sort of translating back and forth, and figuring out what non-technical people need to hear and how they need to hear it, and same thing with technical folks.
Mhm.
And then I think the last piece is a large part of what I did working with college students. So we sent students on, one of the big things that I did was we sent students on this immersion experience, and we would send a few hundred students every summer. And it was my responsibility, and they were on buses, and it was my responsibility to sort of get all of the applications, take 350 students, break them onto buses of 40 students per bus. And these experiences were meant to be really sort of transformational, life-changing experiences. And so I got very good at figuring out very quickly. I do a 10-minute interview with each student, and I figured out how the puzzle pieces of different interests, different groups of friends, different people, different personality styles, how to put a bus of 40 together in a way that every person on that bus added to, not like it wasn't just their experience, it was also how they were contributing to the experience of others. And that is the same way that I got a lot of practice in sort of like how to build teams, and how to really think about not just technical skills, not just like the hard skills that people are bringing to the table, but also the personalities, the soft skills, right? How the puzzle makes everyone and everything else better as well. And I did that for a number of years. And so now when I put together teams, I
Mhm.
feel like it really helped my skill of being able to like have a brief conversation with someone, look at a resume, and not just see what's on paper, but also get it the potential and the understanding of how they would fit with the team that I'm trying to build.
I see why you are so good at offsite planning and diagnosing teams. I see it now. I see it now. It's clearly, yeah, good, good. And we are going to talk about that a lot. So
Yeah, yeah,
it's
and
a
I
good.
imagine I think when you were at GitHub, you led pretty rapid growth in the teams there as well. So I imagine this came into play quite a bit there. I mean, how did you balance the looking at someone's sort of technical background, which maybe is where we would traditionally look at most when we're constructing a team, making sure we've got all the skill sets that we need in the team, with that maybe personality dynamics or personality contributions or charisma. What were you looking for there in the balance of those non-technical skills?
Yeah. I think it's a matter of sort of, again, like teams are puzzles, and you're trying to put the right puzzle pieces in place so that you get that full picture. Um, right. So I think that it's a matter of, so I will say that I always look for three things in folks that I hire sort of across the board. I look for growth mindset, so folks that are sort of excited about learning and interested in new things. I look for folks that are kind, and I look for folks that are collaborative. Those are sort of my top three now and forever. That's like baseline for me. Growth mindset, kind, and collaborative. And then beyond that, right, like you need introverts, you need quieter, thoughtful people that are going to want to sort of like chew on a problem before offering a suggestion or an idea. You need a couple folks that are really great at mentoring and sort of bringing people along the journey. You need folks that are really great at explaining things and breaking down concepts. You need somebody who sort of like brings a lot of energy and joy to the table, right? The person that like keeps Slack going a little bit, or that makes sure that they know what everybody did that past weekend, or you need that kind of person. You also need somebody that sort of maybe keeps that person in check and is like, hey, that's like too much, let's like bring the energy back a little bit sometimes, right? It's all a balance. And when I even with tech skills, especially sort of with the R&D work or some of the new products, when I was building and hiring for those teams, the technology changes, the approach changes. Right at the very beginning, you never know exactly what you're looking for. And so I like to hire teams where different people can sort of step up and step back based on what the situation is, based on what's going on. And that is both technically and non-technically. And also people that are comfortable with others and with themselves stepping up and stepping back. Right. I think that's also really, really important. And so, I think that's sort of broad, but, and then you're sort of looking for what, what fills in the gap, right? What feels like it's missing from your team. And if you know that if you added that piece, like, oh, you need somebody who pushes folks a little further on code review, or who's really sort of like challenging an architectural approach, or you have a lot of that on the team and you need somebody who's like really great at just sort of like going with the flow and contributing ideas, but isn't has maybe sort of more of a strong opinions weakly held sort of mindset, right? You need a balance of all of that on a team. And it's a little bit about knowing what product you're building, knowing what areas you'll need to be flexible in, and knowing what you have and what you don't have. I think I will say this is I look at this when I do like team health audits, and when I'm sort of, because I look at the team dynamics and sort of what that looks like. And sometimes I feel bad talking about it, because this is the one area that I think it gets better with practice. And I think that it's hard I can't just outline like a list of adjectives or things and then give that to somebody and be like, make sure your team checks off all of these personality types or all of these items. You have to sort of like get a vibe from your team. And some things are easy to tell, and some things it just takes practice.
So practice on behalf of on the part of the team leader to see and respond to and try to balance those dynamics within the team that you're talking about, correct?
Yeah. Yeah. And sometimes having other people, peers or coaches or whatever, sort of point out and be like, oh, did you notice this dynamic? Or like, are you seeing? Because also, as you learn how to find and see those dynamics, then you also get better at looking and finding them in the future yourself.
Yeah, yeah. So this really underpins everything that you know that we're talking about today around engineering team health and offsites. Having this understanding of the team dynamics. How maybe we can start with the offsite side of that and come back to the team health audits. How do you consciously try to encourage or help a team see these aspects through the offsites? Like how much of this factors into how you plan an offsite and the activities that you might do?
Yeah, that's interesting. It factors a lot into how I plan offsites. I should say I love planning offsites. It's like maybe my most favorite thing to
Mm-hmm.
do in the whole world. And I think that people, especially engineers, tend to have like very low expectations of offsites, which they shouldn't. It's a shame. I also think that a lot of engineers, there's a lot of, especially for remote teams, there's a lot of anxiety that comes with offsites, right? It's frequently remote teams. You're going to a new place, you're in person with your team for a lot, and it's very sort of concentrated amount of time. There's also sort of a lot of anxiety around it. So I would say for me, I think about it a lot. Um, I don't usually I don't usually point it out to teams that I manage, or like I don't think that the way that they feel it and understand it is sort of like, wow, this is the best team that I've ever worked on, right? And that's my goal, right? My goal is to build teams that are friends decades after they've worked together, and are still sort of like involved in each other's lives or whatnot. And it's not because work is family or any of that. It's because you've built something where people just like really enjoy spending that time together. But I think that, well, I think about it a lot as a leader and as somebody planning an offsite, the way that it comes across to the team is just like, wow, this team is really great.
That's the only survey question you need at the end of it. If you hear people saying that, then you know it was successful. What does an offsite typically look like for you?
Yeah. So an offsite is, I've done offsites for a wide variety of sort of situations, right? So for whole departments, and for smaller, engineering product design leads, right? 3 people to 50 people sort of thing. I'll take it. I think the most typical one is sort of like a team or maybe 2 teams. So like that 10 to 20 person, 10 to 20 person offsite. I think that it needs a good agenda, one that is not too packed but not too open. I think that there's a tendency for folks to either have like a hangout offsite where it's just like, oh, we'll just bring people together. They'll be in the same space, and therefore, like, everyone will love each other by the end and be friends and blah, blah, blah. Or you frequently get the like, we have so much to do. This is the only time that we can get people together. And so it's going to start at 8:30 in the morning and it's going to end at 6. And we're going to go right from the agenda into a team dinner and into an evening activity. And so, you end up having like an 8:30 a.m. to like a 10 p.m. day for 3 days in a row or whatever it is. Right. So it's, what I sort of suggest and what I'm looking for is somewhere in the middle, right? So you recognize sort of what are the main friction points, what are the things that need to happen in person with this group together, but then you have enough sort of like breaks and downtime, and in those breaks and downtime you're sprinkling in like ways for people to connect with one another, ways for folks to not just migrate towards the people that they already know or the people that they've sort of always hung out with. Um, And I will say the other thing that I always do is really, I think that every aspect of an offsite should be looking to create deeper connections between individuals. And sometimes that happens through fun, and sometimes that happens through sessions. How it doesn't happen is when session after session is just sort of a presentation, with any questions, the 10 minutes for any questions at the end. But I think that, you can design business sessions, alignment sessions, et cetera, in ways that are really engaging, in ways that encourage small group discussion, large group discussion, a whole bunch of different modalities and ways to sort of get folks talking. And all of those create deeper connections. You don't just have to be like having fun. And I mean, those sessions can be fun. I've done some sessions about communication or alignment or whatever that have been very fun. But yeah, I think that those are sort of the main components to look for in an offsite.
Let me go a step back. We have clients that, I mean, ourselves, Herring and I, we've done this when the company had a specific structure that made sense. When we transition, well, I mean, the part of the company that transitioned to staff augmentation, we do it with only the people that help us run the business. I mean, with the people that we hire to run the business. So that makes sense. Um, and then we have clients in the staff augmentation side of the business, where we have some clients that bring the remote developers to we bring them, and so they call all the developers, let's say in Panama. I mean, most of the developers are in Brazil, so uh, the company make an offsite in Panama, so all the developers in Brazil comes to Panama, and then we have an offsite there. It is so I have seen a great value in aligning goals and communicating direction and leadership uh, in those events. So let me establish my question. My question is for those companies that still don't do offsites in in currently. So what's the value of doing offsites?
Yeah. There are tons of values for offsites. And I think this is a really interesting, it's an interesting question, because I think that right now, with budget concerns, I think that offsites there's more people working remotely post COVID, because a lot of companies that weren't remote before went remote or more remote hybrid during COVID, and are not doing return to office. So I think there are more remote and distributed teams, and I think that when you're looking at a budget, it's really easy to be like, do we really need that offsite? It feels like the offsite is just a way for folks to get together and hang out. And there are a lot of companies where, like, if you don't put enough thought and time and effort into what an offsite looks like, it is really hard to measure the impact. It is really hard to measure the results. If you think about, I don't know a single company that after the offsite, they'll do like a post offsite survey that gets a sense of like if people enjoyed, what they learned, what their most favorite part was, least favorite part was, et cetera, for the purpose of planning and making the next offsite better. But I don't think frequently companies look at like, well, what came out of that offsite? Are there action plans? Are there deliverables? Like, what were the goals? What were the actual outcomes that make it worthwhile for the business? So I think, one, if you get more granular on the goals and you know what you want the deliverable to be, what you want the outcome to be, what is, again, that friction point that you want to make sure that your team is aligned on. I think those are definitely the value of having an offsite. And then, the other pieces, there are all sorts of statistics about like teams that work together are more productive, teams that, are more connected to one another, have lower churn, have higher retention, et cetera. But I think it's interesting because right now, more remote companies, less offsites, or offsites are being cut from budgets. And I think that it's right now it feels okay. And I think that companies that are doing that in 6 or 8 months, they're going to see fragmentation, they're going to see churn, they're going to see folks that just aren't sort of as, they're going to see teams not functioning as productively and as well as they could be, because they are not having these regular touch points that reconnect them to each other, to their team, to the department, to the company as a whole. Because you can do that virtually. And I've done virtual offsites. I think that virtual offsites don't have to suck. It's a lot of like, I once talked to somebody about a virtual offsite and they were like, I feel like it's a punishment. Is this a punishment? And I'm like, no,
Right.
like
Well,
virtual offsites don't have to feel like a punishment. So you can do it virtually, but it'll be interesting if companies sort of regret cutting that out of their budget in the future.
well, I will argue that if the company is going towards remoteness, the offsites become way more important, right? I
Yeah.
mean, are the opportunity to actually connect? I mean, to in person. I mean, it is now. Can you tell us a small, a short list of goals a company can have for an offsite?
Yeah, ooh, that's a good one. I mean, I think a goal should always be create deeper connections between
Right.
individuals, right? That should be like, and things should be structured in a way that makes that happen, and not in like the, oh, we'll do icebreakers and that will like solve our problem, because
Mhm.
icebreakers help people know each other's names, but they don't frequently sort of go deeper than that, right? We're not talking about sort of surface level connections. We're talking about deeper connections between one another. I think common goals are things like recognize our team's communication style and figure out ways that we want to improve it. Come up with our team's charter, norms, and values. Understand what our Q2, H2 depends on the frequency that you do offsites, but sort of like understand company objectives and goals, and how our team, department, segment, etc., how we connect with that company-wide goal and what that looks like for us. One thing that I've frequently done is if we've had to get on the same page about like on-call expectations, or how we triage incoming bugs, right? And wanting to make that a group conversation and not just sort of a decision that's made by one person. An offsite is a great way to sort of to understand that. And then also product prioritization. So if you're in a spot where sort of you can have some bottom up ideas in addition to maybe sort of top down, like these are the features that we want to build or whatever, I think offsites are a really great place to be able to brainstorm a little bit and talk about ideally engineering is bringing product and design sort of into either all of the days or some of those days of that offsite. And there is often a really great session where there's sort of a brainstorm and maybe a little bit of a discussion around impact and effort for each of those things. And it sort of lays the groundwork, maybe not for the most immediate next quarter or half, but it plants the seeds for the plan after that. So you're not even just talking about like, okay, what is going to kick off in the next week or month, but you're also a great goal for an offsite is sort of like, okay, and let's set the framework and the groundwork for what we want to be doing 6 months from now.
Building custom WebRTC video applications is hard, but your go-live doesn't have to be stressful.
We thought we were ready to launch our video application, but we discovered it's a lot harder than we thought. Live video applications are not like building other web or mobile apps. Our team worked hard out there today, but we just didn't have all the right pieces. I'll tell you what we should have done. We should have brought in the live video experts from WebRTC Ventures.
If you're building a live video application, then trust the experts at WebRTC.Ventures to help you design, build, test, deploy, and manage your custom-built application, or integrate live video into your existing application. Contact us today at WebRTC.Ventures.
I love it. I love it.
I really like the, I think a theme I caught there, and items you were talking about is keeping it fairly high level. And so like when you mentioned like values and, determining our company values and things like that. I mean, to me, if somebody called a virtual meeting and said, hey, we're going to spend an hour Friday afternoon talking about values, I might wonder if it is punishment, right? But if they say, hey, we're going to do an offsite, we're going to, as our team has, we're going to meet up in Panama City, we're going to take a fun boat ride, we're going to go out to lunch, and then we're going to have a conversation about values, right? That sounds a lot more attractive to me, not just because there was maybe a boat ride in advance, but because that activity created, a more open and sort of casual atmosphere within the team, right? Especially as you mentioned, and this is the case with our teams too. Whenever we've done one of these, there are always people meeting for the first time in person, right? Whether sometimes we do this with clients, so they might be meeting their clients in person for the first time. They're probably meeting some of their teammates for the first time. David and I are probably meeting some of them for the first time in person too. There've been times where we've worked remotely with people for, more than a year before ever seeing them in person, right? So having that opportunity to do a social activity to sort of break the ice a bit in an informal way, and then be able to come together and do kind of a brainstorming activity. So, I would say like, our goals, I guess I would suggest, I'm curious, if you agree, Allison, our goals shouldn't be something like really down in the weeds of like, all right, let's figure out our GitHub branching strategy. Maybe that's too detailed. Maybe that's too technical a thing, but talking about our overall roadmap prioritization, like you said, or values, or getting feedback from grassroots, up into leadership. I really like that sort of focus for these types of conversations.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think that it depends on how many days the offsite is, because I do think that you can have a session where you say like, okay, we're going to have one 45-minute block that, we're going to have a bunch of whiteboards and we're going to dive deeply into something like deeply technical that we have to figure out. Who has ideas for, we want to have 2 or 3 options for that session. Who has ideas for what that could or should be? The nice thing about doing just like a time box chunk of something like that at an offsite is that there will be people at the offsite that are frequently not included in those meetings or conversations when they happen virtually. And so it's a really great knowledge. I like to sort of infuse various ways of also doing knowledge sharing. And so it's a nice way to sort of like infuse that knowledge sharing, because there will be people there, and you can do it in a way where you're like, cool, we're going to have 3 projects, we're going to have 45 minutes, and then the last 10 minutes each group is going to pick someone and just sort of walk through like how far they got, what questions they uncovered, what like did they figure out. There was like, oh, actually, if we want to do this piece is really gnarly, and so we need to de-risk that up front, right? And so they're sort of then presenting to the rest of the group, also probably something that wouldn't happen in like your regular day-to-day. So you can get in the weeds. It should be like limited, but it can also be done in really like, again, interesting ways that deepen connections and deepen understanding between individuals and between the team.
I really want to go soon to the engineering team health audit, but this topic is so fascinating. So I when Erin and I do the offsites, we've discovered that, I mean, there is a lot of value in the official in the structured activities, and what we've discovered also is that there is a lot of value when we ourselves, Herring and I, become available in an unofficial way, so they can they can approach us, and we can have a very informal conversation about a topic that they care about a lot. I mean, someone can come close, and we can have a very informal conversation where they can see the angle that maybe we weren't able to express in the structure event or the structure dynamic. So I mean that part is very valuable for us. I mean, it is that connection and that ability to actually see the human side of ourselves is fantastic. Um, Now, you mentioned something some minutes ago about introverts,
Mm-hmm.
and myself, I consider an ambivert, mostly an introvert. I mean, I can will myself to be an extrovert, uh, but it's not easy. And in the sense that once I finish all the extroversion part, I have to go to my room and decompress. But some people is not able to do that, and in our team we have a lot of introverts. I mean, a healthy amount of introverts. Uh, it's never been a challenge, but how how do you help introverts in this very extrovert activity?
Yeah. Yes. Okay. So I have two things. One is
Mhm,
about sort of during structured activities, and one is
mhm,
about during
mhm,
unstructured activities.
mhm,
So in structured activities, it is really important to think about different people and what different people and different personality types will be able to bring to the table.
mhm,
So I do a couple of things. First, like frequently at the beginning and of the offsite, we'll spend 20 minutes doing like a offsite contract, which usually includes things screens, computers closed, try to like stay off phones.
mhm,
And a common one that comes up or that I like is two people speak before one person speaks again. And so that's helpful because it creates more space for introverts because they don't feel like they have to jump into the conversation.
mhm,
Um, so that's one. The second is that I love to do and suggest doing different pieces of a goal where you're sort of maybe you start with like a quiet post-it noting time,
mhm,
right?
mhm,
And everybody sort of puts post-its up with thoughts and then you group those together and then you use those groupings to sort of have the next piece of the conversation. And so you can have a mix of quiet thinking post-it time, all together. There's this one, I don't remember exactly how it goes right now, but there are interesting methodologies also where you sort of, you have like you write a problem statement on the top of a piece of paper and then it's a quiet exercise and you pass it to the person on your left and then they write a challenge and then you pass it to the person on the left and then they write solutions to that challenge and then they pass it. So there are lots of different again sort of like modalities, approaches, really creative ways of thinking about how you do stuff. Maybe you post it and then you have a discussion in small groups of 3 to 4 before you bring it to the large group discussion of 10. And each group talks like, oh, here are the main ideas that I talked about. So as long as you have sort of in whatever structured activities you do, having a mix of approaches and ways, I think that's a really good way to make sure that introverts aren't getting bowled over by any
mhm,
extroverts in the room. So that's for structured activities.
mhm,
For unstructured activities, um, I personally really dislike the like we're just gonna hang out and do whatever, right? Because I think that it just feels really awkward. And some people are great with that and they'll walk around to everybody in the room and they'll insert themselves into different conversations and they'll meet everyone and it'll be great. I think for other people, they tend to like stick with the one or two people that they know, or they end up sort of like just sort of standing awkward, like hoping that somebody else will like come up to them and start, or maybe hoping that nobody comes up to them and starts talking. So, even in those sort of uh, unstructured times, I like to give a little bit of direction, right? Like, here are 3 questions that you should try to ask to 3 people, and things that really sort of like strike up conversations, or maybe you start that unstructured time with some small group, if you have high top tables or something, you start that experience with something that puts people into small groups so that when you go into sort of the like free form, like hangout time, folks have at least connected with a small number of people. And so it just makes it less awkward, less, I don't know, it sort of, I always like, I try as hard as possible not to use the word icebreaker because I think that people are like allergic to the word icebreaker. But it just helps people get to know each other a little bit so that they can, continue conversations and sort of continue from there. And it depends on the group. I've done ones that are like, I've had groups that really love I'll give them like a find someone who board, which is like a piece of paper that has find someone who with all of these different sort of characteristics, and they have to find someone and write that person's name in that box. And it gives people a way to walk up to someone and be like, can I write your name in any of these boxes? And I've had groups that are like, please don't make me do that, that sounds awful. And so for them, we do something a little different. So it depends on the group, but I always, even for like free form stuff, I love having some sort of like mission that is suggested, maybe not required, but like suggested.
Yeah, don't push them. I mean, don't push an introvert. I mean, is the worst strategy. Yeah, I get it. Fantastic. Is your mindfulness about this is fantastic. It's great. Maybe we can switch to the engineering team health audit. There is, when I was reading about the way, I mean, the things that you do there, there is one thing that caught my eye. I mean, it, for Erin and I, is quite important. It's about um, uh, um, help to determine its staffing strategy.
Mm.
For us, it's quite important because when we engage with a new client or with someone that wants to be a client of us, um, we spend a good time determining if that person actually need the people that they say they need. uh, it's quite important because if not, we are engaging in a situation where we we're building structures and relationships that later we have to destroy. Uh, so we want to be sure that actually they need that many people. So how do you go about that?
Yeah. So when I am looking at an engineering team and sort of trying to figure out the, health of that team, there are, so there are few sort of like aspects that I look at, and each of the aspects has a bunch of stuff that goes into it. But it's, turnover risk and what happens when turnover happens. Does turnover feel chaotic or not? Good code review quality, prioritization clarity. How well do engineers know not just what they should be working on, but why and how prioritization is happening? Healthy team dynamics. We talked about this a bunch before, but it's verbal communication, written communication, dynamics in meetings, etc. And low cycle time. So those are the things that I look at, and I think that when you really sort of dive into those aspects, you can tell what the gaps are. You can tell if it's like, okay, there are enough people here, but there are just a number of inefficiencies in the process. Prioritization clarity is a great one to talk about here because engineers frequently deal with so many incoming streams of requests, right? They have bugs, they have refactors, they have tech debt, they have customer support requests, they often have someone in leadership or like someone who's maybe in their DMs asking for something. And so that's a place where that can, I think, frequently make an engineering team look slower or look like there need to be more people, but it's actually that there are inefficiencies within that process. Or, with turnover, there's one person who is the go-to person for a specific area of the code base, and nobody else knows anything there, right? So it's sort of about knowledge sharing and what's, how the team does that. So I think it's about looking at how healthy a team is and figuring out like, okay, or good code review quality, right? Like, oh, there's code review quality is about not shipping bugs and about shipping maintainable code. It's also about the conversation that happens in that code review. And if they're collaborative and if people are learning and if people are growing through that. And so, when figuring out sort of what the gaps are, maybe they don't have someone who has the skill set or the time to provide good code review, and therefore a lot of the code review of the team is like a looks good to me with a thumbs up sort of thing. So I think all of those different aspects can help. Really diving into those can help reveal what the gaps are, and then for staffing purposes, right, who needs to fill that? Can it be a junior engineer because you're mostly looking for this sort of non-technical skill? Does it need to be a senior staff engineer? What, again, we talked sort of about the puzzle pieces of teams before. What's the kind of person that needs to go into that team? Sometimes it's a person in staffing, sometimes it's a process, sometimes it's a habit that needs to be formed. The solution to bringing something from, let's say, red to green of one of those aspects is, it can be a whole bunch of different approaches.
It sounds like you need to really embed with the team for a little while to get a full assessment of these things when you're doing a team audit. Can you talk a little bit about that process of how you engage with a client?
Yeah. Usually I ask the client to just sort of like give me access to all the thing. I try to just be a fly on the wall. But yeah, it does involve sort of, attending a handful of meetings to see what the dynamic is there, looking at, being in Slack, looking at that communication, seeing the process of how things go. Sometimes pulling in, I don't sort of like talk to everybody on the leadership team or everybody on the engineering team. I don't think that that's totally necessary, but it is about, pulling in different people. And not to say like, how do you think prioritization clarity is? How do you think the team dynamic is? But to ask them questions about, like what feel like the most painful parts of your workflow, of your process. What if you could, wave a magic wand and make something better? What's the number one thing that you would make better? And you can sort of see through a couple of key conversations and all the other things that are happening, you can see the patterns and the flows, and you can sort of get a sense of what's going on and how to, when I do this, it's fashioned into a report, right? So what that report needs to say that can be really helpful to, to the executive that I'm giving it to.
And is this something you would do kind of before or after an offsite, perhaps? Is there a relationship between those, or is this something you would do on, say, an annual basis, or you could do on a regular basis for a company? What's the sort of cadence?
Yeah, I think it depends. Some companies like doing this as sort of a discovery. Some investors like doing this as sort of like a pre-investment. Okay, where is this team at? What's going on here? I think that it could, be a really, if a team is trying to figure out. So the way that I help people with offsites is that I don't usually come in and facilitate them. I can be a facilitator, but for me, it's really about supporting the individuals to make sure that they can execute their really amazing offsite, but taking big chunks of that work and that time off of their plate, and then handing it back to them to do so. So if a team comes to me and they have enough time before their offsite, this might be a really good way, and they're not sure what to focus on during the offsite, this might be a really good way to get a really clear snapshot and picture of where the team is at in order to figure out what the best agenda is for that offsite. What are the things they really want to talk about, do a session on, hit on, make sure come up. So yeah, I think it comes up in all sorts of different circumstances.
Excellent.
We are running out of time. I want to touch briefly about I mean, very briefly, because um, a lot of
There's so much
questions
more
I
we could
have.
talk just
So
about
much, right,
offsites.
right. But you also work as a you could work as a fractional VP of engineering. It's, I mean, a few comments. How does it work?
Yeah. So fractional VP of engineering is a great option. It works in a couple of ways. Either when a company is going through sort of a leadership transition and they need someone who has like seen it before, done it before, that can just sort of like plug in really easily to make sure things keep going, to make sure that, their engineers, to make sure velocity doesn't slow down, to make sure their engineers don't sort of like feel the pain that a leadership transition can be. And the other time that it happens is when the founders, or when they're great at shipping code, they're great at being a startup CTO, maybe don't have that sort of depth of management experience, and they're finding that things are falling through the cracks, or there's just like there's too much on their plate, or frequently they want to stay more in the code and they keep getting pulled into people stuff, process stuff, cross departmental, and they just like it's not, they've done it a little bit, it's not what they love doing. Those are the places that I can, that usually fractional VP of engineering is super useful. And also thinking about, fractional VP of engineering is usually a point in time sort of engagement. And so the goal is to, ideally that the company will grow enough that they will need a full-time VP of engineering, in which case having somebody who's there on a fractional basis is really, really helpful, because it's really painful to make a VP of engineering mishire. And there are so many different flavors of like a VP of engineering or a CTO. You want to make sure that you, again, the puzzle piece, that the kind of person that you're hiring for, what their skills need to be strong in, what the team needs, and having somebody who is there on a fractional basis can help frame that, write that job description, even sometimes review resumes and do like initial conversations with folks to make sure that you are getting the right person in the door that's going to be a really great long-term fit for your company.
Yeah, looking at it as a point in time, I think is really interesting, because that's where I've kind of encountered a need for this type of role. Like for us as a services company, there have been times where we're working with a startup client and they don't have a technical co-founder yet, perhaps, right? And you could probably find 100 meetups just this weekend on find your technical co-founder, right? I feel like there's so many of those out, and it's difficult to find a technical co-founder. So to be able to say, we've had people ask us, would you be like my fractional CTO, my interim CTO until I get funding or until this? And I think it's a really, really hard thing to do. I mean, in my case, I have turned those down because I have a job and I can't really, it's hard to do that and give it justice, right? So I think having people who have the right mindset about it and can dedicate themselves to that, I think is super important, because there are companies who need that. And I think it's an incredibly important role. I mean, in sports, you hear about like interim head coaches, turnaround head coaches who come in specifically in certain types of situations. And they don't want the long-term job. They're there for 6 months or a year, and then they are trying to pass it along to somebody else, but in a better situation than they received it, perhaps, right? And I think that's a really interesting aspect of this type of role.
Yeah, I think it also allows, it's an interesting, the difference between sort of maybe like a technical co-founder and like a, some fractional CTOs, VPs are building and shipping, but it allows you to sort of separate those two things and engage with, one person who's just focused on building and shipping the product and is heads down in the code, and working with somebody else who's really helping to think about like the engineering strategy, who the first 3-4 hires are, what that looks like, how to build the foundation for a really strong team that's also going to enable you to get funding, right? Because investors like seeing, engineering teams are the backbone of a lot of these companies. So funders, they want to see strong engineering teams that seem not put together in like a haphazard way, but put together really sort of mindfully and thoughtfully. And so, engaging it also allows you to separate sort of like, okay, I need somebody who can build and ship and be heads down in the code a lot versus like somebody who's thinking about sort of the strategy of the company and where engineering and engineering as a part of a larger ecosystem is going and what they're working towards.
Absolutely. I really appreciate the mindful and thoughtful approach you've brought to this team building discussion in many facets today. David, do you have any final questions for Allison before we wrap up?
Hundreds.
Exactly. I have so many more offsite stories I want to share, but
not for now. I would love to have Allison for our next episode in the future. I mean, it will be
yeah, we'd love to speak with you again, Allison. Really appreciate you taking the time to talk with us today. How can our listeners get in touch with you?
Listeners can find me. This is, I made a mistake. Who knew that Twitter was going to be Twitter and that I should have established a social media handle, one for all the platforms? I did not. So the best way to find me is on my website, which is AllisonMcMillan.com. And you can find my emails and my socials. You can also book a free consultation if you sort of want to chat about any of my services or anything that's going on with your company. You can book a free consultation there. So yeah, that's the best place to go, and it links to all of my other things.
That'll point to everything else. So we'll be sure to put AllisonMcMillan.com in the show notes for this episode. And Allison, thank you again for joining us on the Scaling Tech podcast. Really enjoyed it.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Thanks for joining us on the Scaling Tech podcast, where we help you manage your growing engineering team. Brought to you by AgilityFeet.com, experts in staffing engineering teams in Latin America for clients globally. For more information on today's episode and to submit your ideas for future guests, please visit scalingtechpod.com.